the headline that grabbed everyone's attention.
I was stunned to read this.
A 60-year-old bookkeeper, just an ordinary guy, steals almost $1 million.
I was shocked. Why would somebody rip off children?
And he gets away with it.
It's so manipulative. It takes one's breath away.
Someone who never broke a law in his life.
Is he armed? Is he dangerous?
Where did he go?
His wife drove him to the airport, and that was the last anybody seen of him.
For 2 years, police wanted him, journalists tracked him. No one could find him. We did. Tonight, in an exclusive interview, the man behind the disappearing act.
It's safe to say, had the Fifth Estate not found David Reiner and brought him in to face justice, he would probably still be sitting in Africa instead of a jail cell in Toronto. I'm Hana Gartner. Welcome to the Fifth Estate. You think you know someone? Well, those who thought they knew David Reiner described a dependable do-gooder, generous to a fault. That's why they were so surprised when 2 years ago this guy next door vanished. Disappeared with almost $1 million, money he stole from 21 non-profit daycare centers. No one saw this coming, but everyone had a theory. Was it a bad marriage, midlife crisis? Did he just want to walk away from a boring life? Turns out there's a whole other side to the man and the story.
This is where we found David Reiner, in Kenya, East Africa.
Everybody wants to be judge, jury, and executioner.
He agreed to meet at this secluded spot on the outskirts of Nairobi. David Reiner is looking for sympathy and understanding.
Didn't feel like stealing. It didn't feel like stealing at the time.
And now you left a bunch of people in Toronto believing you're a crook and a con.
It wasn't the plan, that's for sure.
So what happened?
So what happens? It's a long story.
That story began right here on this Toronto street corner 2 years ago.
It was early in the morning. I would meet up with him at 7 o'clock. I was there first, grabbed 2 coffees, went out to the corner, but then I get word. It's 5 after 7. He's never, ever late.
And this is payroll day.
This is payroll day, yeah.
Maureen Myers was the director of the McMurridge Sprouts Daycare Center. She loved taking care of the children and was grateful to have David Reiner take care of her business affairs. And after 18 years, she saw him as not just a bookkeeper, but a friend. Their routine was to meet every 2 weeks to go over the books.
7:15, okay, it's getting late. I called him on his cell's full, house line's full. I can't leave a message or get in touch with him. I thought something had happened to him. Like, in 18 years, he'd never missed a time to meet with me. He'd never been late. So I emailed him and said, "Are you okay?" And I got an immediate response.
Saying?
"Oh, please forgive me for this disappearing act."
What she didn't know was that this message was coming from a computer 12,000 kilometers away. David Reiner had timed his getaway perfectly. In the next few days, Myers and 20 other daycare operators would make 2 terrible discoveries. They'd been robbed, and their trusted bookkeeper was a fraud.
I was having terrible difficulty with facing the whole concept of telling people what I have done and betraying everybody and being so dishonest and
Especially because you knew they had a whole other image
Absolutely.
of David Reiner. This was not the guy they knew, right?
That's right. That's right. I was just trying to find a way of getting out of it and getting out of it without everybody finding out that I was such a jerk.
Reiner's first instinct was to run, and he knew where to hide. Nairobi, Kenya.
I know they had no extradition with Canada, so they weren't going to come and get me, and it was just a safe haven, a holding spot for a short time.
Back in Toronto, Maureen Myers still had no idea why Reiner hadn't shown up. Well, she would find out soon enough.
Monday, I get our bank statements. It's like, oh, we have like $14 in the bank. It was an incredible shock.
How much money was siphoned out of your account?
Out of our account, about $120,000 was all gone.
You were wiped out?
We were wiped out. I mean, it's like, how can that happen?
20 other daycares were asking themselves the same question. David Reiner had taken them for almost $1 million.
It was unbelievable. Yeah, I couldn't believe what was happening and that this man had done this to so many people.
It seems unbelievable because, by all appearances, David Reiner had a pretty good life. He'd been married to the same woman for over 20 years. They had 2 daughters and lived in a nice house in a quiet Toronto neighborhood. Pretty good for a self-taught bookkeeper. And he was a hard worker, but he also made time to do volunteer work in the community. And where some had a hobby, David Reiner had a cause. Several times a year, he would take off to work with aid agencies in the slums of Africa. That's why no one understood why he'd throw that all away by committing such a heartless crime.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. Why would somebody do this? Why would somebody rip off children?
The only explanation she got came in the mail. A letter David Reiner had written to all the daycares. He said he was sorry, that he'd been working a relentless schedule, just too many hours, that he needed to take care of his health and devote more time to the only rewarding part of his life, his aid work in Africa.
Letters. I wrote letters. Telling them that I was having lots of issues and don't remember the exact words.
Suggesting a breakdown.
Suggesting a breakdown.
You said you were working 14 hours a day and that so the suggestion was that you snapped.
I did. I did. I thought this was actually going to work. I actually thought this was going to work.
While David Reiner was spinning his story, the world was catching up. His face was plastered all over the internet. Even though he looked different from the police wanted photo, he'd lost about 60 pounds, the story of his betrayals was there for everyone to see.
I really believed that somehow this was going to be okay. I was going to work this out somehow, that I would be able to come back and straighten this out.
Plenty of people in Nairobi knew David Reiner. Kenya's capital was bustling with international aid workers, many of whom he'd met on his past trips here. Reiner needed a better place to hide out.
He was in panic. He called me from the Norfolk Hotel. He said, "Mike, I got to talk to you." And I said, "Well, if we're going to talk, you should come to the camp."
If you want to disappear, Mike Rainey's safari camp at the base of Kilimanjaro on the Serengeti just might be the ideal place. It's accessible only by bush plane. Mike Rainey met Reiner on his first trip to Africa as a university student some 30 years ago. Rainey had never seen his friend so upset and had no reason to doubt his explanation.
He was stressed. He said, "I'm going through a midlife crisis. I've left home.
This is what he told you.
And he owed some money, and he said he'd mortgaged his house to pay for the money he owed, several $100,000. And he just finally said, I can't stand this life in Canada.
Mike Rainey was sympathetic. He left his life in the U.S. and moved here almost 4 decades ago.
So this is the first one, right? Yeah. He's more than 50 years old.
He understood Reiner's passion for the place and his desire to help its people.
He was proud of what he was doing.
It meant a lot to him.
You know, we get people who get the Africa bug and it doesn't go away. So I think he tried on Africa, he caught the bug, and then he went back and led a very orthodox life. If this guy's 55, this one's 40.
Rainey really had no idea. It wasn't life Reiner was running from, it was the law. David Reiner did not want Rainey to learn the truth, so after just 4 days, he was gone.
He left owing me some money.
How much money did he owe you?
About $1,500.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Did you feel taken?
I
by
didn't
David
feel,
Reiner?
There was a breach of trust, yes, huge. And I felt ripped off. But compared to the loss that was being reported by the 20-odd daycares, you know, I thought this is pretty small stuff.
When did you find out that he was a fugitive on the run?
One of our students said, have you heard about David Reiner? It took 2 words on Google. Well, David Reiner and fraud, and dung, 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 dung. You know, I thought, well, have you brought all that money with you? I never got the impression that he actually had money with him.
So the obvious question is, where is the money?
I didn't have the cash that everybody thought I had. It was gone.
Where would you hide if you had just stolen close to $1 million? Well, when the news broke in Canada that David Reiner had run away to Africa, everyone just assumed he was throwing back pina coladas at some exclusive resort. There were even rumors he was seen walking these beaches along the Indian Ocean in Mombasa. Journalists went chasing that story, but police knew they would be wasting their time.
Was there anything that you did to try to get him back?
I emailed him.
You email him what? Come back, please?
All the email addresses just to contact me, and he never responded.
That's because Fraud Squad Detective Gary Hickey explains David Reiner escaped to a country that has no extradition treaty with Canada.
He's
in a country where we can't touch him.
Given how people describe him, that he was a kind-hearted, good guy, you keep reaching for some sort of an explanation.
Yeah, I don't have an explanation for that. No, we're always shocked to find it's the person next door.
I was shocked when I first heard Kenya. He's coming back, isn't he?
Maureen Myers was still wrestling with the big question. Why would someone she trusted for 18 years betray her like this?
You don't wake up at 59 years old and go, I think I'm going to rip these people off. I'm going to take all their money and run away and move to Africa. That's bizarre.
I've been doing a lot of soul searching and trying to figure out what the hell I was up to, because it doesn't make a lot of sense.
In David Reiner's version of this story, and this is the way he tells it, he may have done a bad thing, but it was for a good cause. And he thinks his problem started 5 years ago at a fateful meeting with international AIDS envoy Stephen Lewis.
I was somewhat nervous going to meet this man, and when I knocked on the door flew open, and there was Stephen, and he stood there with his arms stretched out, and he says, "The famous David Reiner, I finally get to meet you."
Hey, that's good. Congratulations.
Reiner loves to tell the story about how he was paid to travel throughout Africa on behalf of the Stephen Lewis Foundation. David Reiner even came to see himself as Stephen Lewis's man in Africa.
Stephen speaks, people write checks. You know, it was a very simple system. There was always somebody who would ask, you know, how do we know the money's going to the right place? People are always, I mean, Africa has a terrible reputation in terms of integrity. And so yeah, I would say Stephen counted on me.
We at one point sent him to Africa, to Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda to look at projects and help them in the administration of the finances.
Make sure the money was going to the right place?
Precisely. These are organizations struggling on the ground. People are dying, people are ill, they need help. And we had confidence in David at that time.
Reiner thought he'd found his calling. He wanted to volunteer with other aid groups. So several times a year, he'd pack his bags and head for Africa, staying for weeks on end. Reiner says he wandered into trouble because he'd often pay for those African trips out of his own pocket.
I got into this situation, which I didn't fully understand at the time. I had all this extra burden of financial expense and less income.
The trusted bookkeeper claims he did not see what he was walking into when he dipped into clients' accounts, eventually siphoning off hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay his personal bills.
I was having about $2 million a month going through my bank account. And I started using some of this money to temporarily take care of some of the expenses I had because I was short myself.
So you knew it was stealing?
Well, I know it's stealing now, but I wasn't thinking about it at the time.
The image was accountant takes a powder with $800,000 and is sitting on a beach somewhere.
Right, briefcase full of money, you know, $100 bills, and you know, I didn't have the cash that everybody thought I had. I mean, I left with virtually nothing.
And that is how, if you believe him, the man who stole almost $1 million wound up here without a penny to his name. And that's certainly how he lived. This city boy from Toronto,
Jumbo.
used to picking up a latte on his way to work, now had to survive like the 60,000 others crowded into this sprawling slum. He'd always had the reputation of being a bit of a schmoozer, but now in this last refuge of the most desperate, Reiner really had to learn to talk fast.
Hello, white man.
How are you?
How are you?
How are you, black man? Mazuri sana. Na wewe.
No one back home would ever have believed David Reiner would end up here.
But your life was crumbling. Your life is, you knew it.
I was a fugitive, and I felt very much that I wasn't ready to come back yet, to face the music.
There was a time, Reiner says, he dreamed of helping these people. Now they were helping him. Soon he was going to need a lot more help. Disaster seemed to follow this man at every turn. A post-election tribal bloodbath broke out on Reiner's doorstep. Now he was hiding out in the middle of an international news story.
There was no way out of here because the roads were closed. There was no petrol, there were no vehicles. I had to wait until there was a window. One day there was a bus that left, and I jumped on it and left and got out of here.
Reiner had been running from the law. Now he was running to save his life. He got a fisherman to smuggle him illegally into Uganda. He hitchhiked his way to Kampala to someone he knew who would take him in. Rosemary Nakujoba had no reason to doubt him when he said he'd come on an aid mission.
When he came, he didn't actually tell me why he left Canada, but he told me, initially, as he has been saying, he knew he wanted to come and work in Africa. Actually, here is a picture of David when we were with him.
The two first met some years ago at an AIDS conference in Toronto. So when Reiner told her he'd come to help local charities get Canadian funding from the Stephen Lewis Foundation, she opened her home to him.
He was here for about a month and a week. A month and a week.
In your home?
In my home here.
Her family of 9 was crammed into 3 small rooms, but they gladly gave one up to Reiner.
This is the bed David slept in. Many times he sat here.
Then, as the weeks passed, it became clear this house guest had no intention of leaving.
He had totally nothing. It became very expensive because even the water itself could disturb his stomach and he feels diarrhea. So we could buy the water, the mineral water, from the shop. And that is the only water he could use even to make tea. So life became very expensive. I mean, the feeding also became hard.
Nakujoba now understood David Reiner was not the man he pretended to be.
We weren't impressed. We have realized David actually has no connections and has no people to give us money, so I think he's not worth a person to continue keeping here.
Didn't you feel you were being taken advantage of?
No.
No?
Why no? Why I didn't feel that? He's just desperate. That's the thing. He's just desperate. He's an old man, really. For how long can he continue living like that? If he dies here in Africa, what's going to happen?
Desperate and destitute, David Reiner had become a prisoner in Africa.
You started out not wanting to lose face, not wanting to have all these people think badly
Right.
of you, and you're digging the hole deeper and deeper with every move.
Well, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I have no money. I have no income. So what do I do now? My name is David, from Canada. I come from Canada. How are you?
He did have one thing of value left, a calling card that said, the Stephen Lewis Foundation.
I sometimes wonder if there isn't a touch of the sociopath here, this constant need to tell falsehoods, to mislead people.
He may be reviled back home, but this is the welcome disgraced bookkeeper David Reiner got in Kenya.
How are you?
This is typical African hospitality, and David Reiner has learned to take advantage of it.
Me?
His new life in Africa includes a girlfriend, 24-year-old Nancy. Everyone thought David Reiner was a great catch. The hope was this man from Canada would help make life better here.
Well, this is all I have left from all the money.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it was such a business, but I did it anyway.
Well, Nancy knows the truth, but she loves him anyway, even though he's broke. So broke, he's had to turn for help to his 86-year-old mother, Margot.
We went to the bank.
It's a weekly ritual. Reiner calls, his mother pays. A widow living alone in a senior's home, she does what she can for her 60-year-old son.
Okay, dear. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. If he asks on the phone and he needs $50 or $100, yes, I do. I do give him.
Is there anything in his life that would lead you to understand why it turned out this way?
No, no. I would have never in a million years. I thought his best quality is his honesty.
Did you ever tell him, just come home, David, and face the music?
No, I didn't tell him. It's no good repeating that to him, coming from me, you know. And he knows that I try and want to make it a little easier for him, maybe, you know. Maybe it's wrong, I don't know.
Reiner's struggle to survive did not leave him with much pride. He was always on the prowl for money, always checking in with Western Union to see if one of his calls for help had paid off. He had been getting some work with local aid organizations, which always need expert advice on how to get more funding.
Weren't you afraid that somebody's going to Google David Reiner and it's all going to be there?
The culture here is very different than in Canada in terms of the sorts of things that I was accused of doing. Most people accept corruption here as part of the way of life.
So you felt safe?
I felt relatively safe, yes.
Besides, no one ever checks his credentials, not once he tells them he can use his connections to get them funding from the Stephen Lewis Foundation.
My name is David, from Canada. I come from Canada. How are you?
The Pandipieri Center, which cares for 1,000 slum kids, is so desperate for cash, they don't see they're being hustled.
When I left here in January, we talked about applying to Stephen Lewis for extra funding, and anything happen with this?
No.
Oh, really?
We didn't.
Well, I'm actually going to be here for a few days. Do you want to sit down tomorrow and maybe we can ask them? Yeah. It's not too late to get money.
Yeah.
It's never too late to get money.
It's so manipulative. It was such a sort of snake oil salesperson's approach that it takes one's breath away.
Turns out Stephen Lewis was one of the few who did see through David Reiner. He fired him 1 year before Reiner robbed the daycares.
You fired him, you terminated him.
We terminated him, and that was a good thing, Hannah, because we didn't lose a penny, thank God.
Lewis may have fired him, but he can't stop Reiner from conning these aid agencies.
We learned, to our horror, that they were under the impression that he was still working for us and that he was going to Africa for us.
Reiner gladly took us to Pandipieri in Kisumu in Kenya to show us, this is where I worked. They welcomed him with open arms, and I heard them saying, can you come tomorrow and help us write a proposal to Stephen Lewis?
2 of our senior staff went to Uganda in December of 2007 and came back and said, my God, it's been reported in so many places that David Reiner is presenting himself as a foundation official, offering to write project proposals, promising them that he will get the money for them. Do you know how cruel that is? I sometimes wonder if there isn't a touch of the sociopath here.
Not only has the Stephen Lewis Foundation denied all of Reiner's funding applications, it has sent out some 400 letters to African aid projects like this one.
So you were diagnosed with HIV how long ago now?
Warning them David Reiner is a fraud.
Just 2003, 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen the letters. People have shown me this letter.
So why do you keep talking about him and saying you're going to write proposals to the Stephen Lewis Foundation?
I mentioned his name possibly, and it comes up, and I write proposals to the family foundation, but I don't go around using that as my calling card. I think that's unfair.
When we first talked, you were telling me you came to Africa to save African lives. But what we've been hearing is you've been exploiting vulnerable people for your own advantage.
Whoa, I'm finding this bizarre that you're saying that. I have been doing a lot of work here, helping people. I was quite pleased to trade my services for beans and rice and just keep going. When you're in survival mode, you do what you have to do.
And what David Reiner was doing to survive was getting him into a lot of trouble. But had he known the kind of trouble he was heading for this time, he would not have gotten on that ferry to Kalangala. It is deep in the remote part of the Sese Islands in East Africa, a favorite spot for smugglers. Reiner figured nobody around here would be asking too many questions. This is a no man's land with few resources. Fishermen eke out a living and rely on a small, bare-bones charity to feed and educate their children. It's run by Liz Humphreys. She's still kicking herself for buying Reiner's story.
Why was somebody of that age permanently in Africa, never seeming to go back to Canada ever, with absolutely no money behind him?
What would bring a guy like David Reiner to Kalingalua?
He said he'd been working for the Stephen Lewis Foundation for some time as an accountant, but that he wanted to spend more and more time in Africa. He suggested putting in a proposal to the Stephen Lewis Foundation. He said, "I'll help you with that." So I said, "Wonderful."
When Humphreys had to leave for a few weeks to go to England, she put Reiner in charge.
And he emailed to say he'd run out of money. So I was a bit taken aback by this. So I said, "Can you send me accounts?" So he said, he sent me some accounts. Then I said, I need more detail because there are some funny figures here.
Funny figures?
Well, there's figures that didn't make sense.
By the time she got back, Reiner was long gone with $600, Humphrey says, he stole from her charity. But now the net was about to close in on David Reiner.
Is he armed? Is he dangerous?
These children are learning a very tough lesson. Their daycare was robbed of $120,000, and they know the bookkeeper did it. Now they're trying to replace the money David Reiner stole penny by penny. Maureen Myers had given Reiner the benefit of the doubt. Maybe this was a misguided attempt to change his life. But now she knew it was all a lie.
Why would somebody do this? Steal from families who are in a nonprofit organization? And then why would he go to Africa and continue to do that to more children? It's like, let's get him back here. You know, this is terrible. Why isn't somebody going after him?
It wasn't just Reiner's victims who were hurt in all this. His family was devastated. Reiner hadn't seen his daughters in 2 years, and his wife, she filed for divorce soon after he made his getaway. None of them want to appear on camera. Reiner wanted everyone to believe that he ran to Africa to redeem himself by saving African lives. Well, he was barely able to save his own life. Those who ran the African aid agencies now knew he could do nothing for them. And worse, he was accused of stealing from a charity. Reiner was petrified African police were closing in on him. He was running on fear, but about to come to the end of the road.
And this was the last stop, Mila and Hanu Haponen. Reiner gave them the same old story, but this time it would end very differently.
When we heard of David Reiner, that he has worked for Stephen Lewis Foundation, yes, we were like thrilled.
The Haponens are Finnish-Canadian missionaries working in Kampala, Uganda.
You know, we've read, Stephen Lewis's book and actually got an autographed copy of it and everything. And then all at once, somebody who's worked for the guy is willing to come and do something for us. It was
we were excited. We were like,
a dream come true.
Yeah.
Too good to be true.
Their charity, Caring Hands, is helping to rebuild these women's lives. Victims of rape, witness to murder, they're acting out their ordeal.
Cut out in small pieces, the head alone, the leg alone, the thigh, everything in pieces.
They are survivors of the brutal tribal war in northern Uganda. This may be therapeutic, but painful to watch. And Mila Haponen says David Reiner appeared to be genuinely moved.
He was really touched, like he actually had tears in his eyes, and we thought that we did a good job.
Yeah. You wanted to impress him?
Yes, because,
And they were so impressed with Reiner, they were ready to hire him on the spot. But something about him just didn't add up.
Here's a guy with a resume who's been working for all of these organizations. It's an opportunity for us, like, you can't, you'd have to buy with a lot of money that type of help. And this guy, on the drop of a dime, is willing to come here. And as I was sitting there at the kitchen table, my wife came from the bedroom about 2 seconds later, and she said to me, she says that, the thought came to me is that, what if this guy's a con man?
And then Hanu said, Milla, I just thought about the same thing.
And what
even now I have goosebumps.
So they Googled the name David Reiner.
And Hanu gave me a look like this. The eyes just blinked, like a bit slowly, and then I knew, and I felt like all my strength disappeared from my arms down and from my knees down. We had a sleepless night.
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah, we didn't sleep that night very well at all.
I don't know whether to...
No, there was this feeling of almost like a panic. Well, what do you do? This is a guy that's staying here in our neighbor, in the house next to us, and is he armed?
Is he dangerous?
He wanted to see me in a Ugandan jail, and he started contacting everyone in Uganda and tell them who I really was. So it made me very nervous. I mean, the Ugandan jail is a little more serious than the Canadian jail.
Reiner has come full circle. He ran away from Canada to escape the law. Now, a Canadian jail cell looks like Reiner's last refuge.
He decides finally to turn himself in to the Canadian consulate in Uganda's capital, Kampala. Reiner practically begs them to take him home to Canada. He's surprised when they basically say, sorry, you are on your own.
I couldn't turn myself in.
Reiner cannot believe this. He is a wanted criminal. He stole almost $1 million from children's daycares, and they're telling him if he wants to get arrested, he has to pay for his own flight home?
So how's he going to get home?
Gary Hickey's the Toronto cop who's been tracking Reiner for 2 years.
We just can't go pluck somebody out of another country.
So he has to pay for his own flight to hand himself over to you?
Well, that's the way it is.
Now this is precisely the moment in the story where our paths intersect, where we find David Reiner. He is going down and sees us as his lifeline. Reiner wants us to bring him in. But after he has a night to think about it, Reiner, true to form, comes up with an angle.
He thought what great timing it would be to come home the day after this was aired.
So, but you're suggesting that you use the ticket after this airs?
Yeah, come back the day afterwards. It's a thought I had last night.
But I don't get.
Well, the whole purpose of this is to, for me, is that I wasn't on the beach drinking.
Right.
And that I didn't leave Canada with a suitcase of money and hiring prostitutes and running around. And that was important for me, because when I get back, nobody's going to listen to me.
I don't think we can give you a ticket and say, whenever it's convenient, see you later.
Why not? Have I let you down?
I don't think so.
You can't trust me.
I don't think we can do that. I spoke to your daughter, and she said that all her life she thought you were a man of integrity. But now she doesn't even know when you are telling the truth.
I don't have to go home now. You give me a ticket. This situation I'm in right now is no different than it's been for the last 2 years. I mean, nothing has changed, you know.
Well, nobody is going to hire you. No project is going to touch you with a 10-foot pole.
In Kenya and Uganda.
So where are you going to go?
There's a big world out there. There's lots of things I could do.
You appear to have a good life in Canada. You had a wife, you had 2 kids, 2 cars, a nice house in a nice neighborhood. I mean, those are the trappings of a successful life. What happened, David?
I'm not sure myself what happened. I'm trying to figure it out. Why in the world I would have done all of this.
You have no insight whatsoever?
Mm-hmm.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will shortly be landing in Toronto. Please return.
It now seems David Reiner will have a long time to think about it. The man many Canadians imagined was living out an exile's dream in Africa can only look forward to a jail cell in Canada.